In a vacuum, Personal Spoofing is one of, if not the most powerful Altergeist card in an Altergeist deck. I know it's not technically an Altergeist card by name, but it might as well be. It obviously makes a huge difference that it's not, but this card says once per turn you can shuffle one Altergeist card from your hand or face up on your field into the main deck, add one Altergeist monster from your deck to your hand. Now on a surface level analysis, this card is very good. A lot of people use it to add Multi-Faker or Concrete to their hand on their opponent's turn, and while it is a very useful part of this card's application, where I find the real beauty of this card is, and the real power of this card, it's that once you sort of set up on your opponent's turn with the Multi-Faker, with the Concrete, with all your negations, what this card allows you to do is then shuffle back whichever of those cards is the least important to you, and then add a Marionetter or Milusic to your hand to continue your combos on your own turn. If Personal Spoofing stays on the field and resolves multiple times, it is very easy to win in most matchups. However, after a couple weeks of playing this deck in a row in the same format, and also after 11 months of playing this deck pretty much straightforward except YCS Pasadena, I finally decided to try one tournament without any copies of Personal Spoofing in my deck, and that was at ARG Chicago. Now, admittedly, I did not perform super well at this event, not quite. I just fell short of what I wanted to finish. I did manage to get 10th at the 1K in a day. Not anything to write home about, but I got this cool mat. It says top 16. There's like some kaijus in the background, and I almost made the top 16 mark as the main event, except I unfortunately had some losses. I took one loss to an accidental cheating on my opponent's side. I know it was accidental, but definitely was kind of salty losing like that. And also I took a couple losses to time, which was very disappointing. I'll have a video in a couple days here about time after the new time rules after 1 year. However, I can say with confidence that not once did I miss having Personal Spoofing. And don't get me wrong, this card is very good, and in the past this card has been extremely powerful. However, there's a lot of reasons this card isn't good right now, and I think that right now maybe the right way to go is to not play Personal Spoofing until some of these things change. So the biggest reason to not play this card right now is that there's simply too many hard counters to it running around people's main and side decks. Things like Ash Blossom and Twin Twisters and even MST really hurt Personal Spoofing, and that's a pretty big deal because right now when you're thinking about playing against decks like Salamangreats and Skyscrapers, you're looking to get as much card advantage as possible. You want to maximize the efficiency of all your cards, so Personal Spoofing, when you use it and shuffle back a card for cost, then your opponent just hits it with Twin Twisters, not only do you lose the Personal Spoofing, like in the case of this was any trap card that was hit with Twin Twisters, you'd of course lose that trap card, but you also lose the card you put back. So now your opponent used their one card to deal with your one card, and when you're trying to play these value matchups, you're trying to get as much card advantage as possible, it really hurts when your opponent stops this card. So I tried it without it for one event, and honestly, I didn't miss it. Now, when we go into a format where people maybe aren't playing Twin Twisters as much in the main deck, or maybe where people aren't playing Ash Blossom as much in the main deck, maybe this card will be worth playing again. But for right now, I think it was pretty good not to play it, and it also opened up some opportunities in my main deck to play other tech options. It's also worth mentioning, and one of the bigger reasons that I chose not to play this card, that oftentimes you do side Personal Spoofing out at least 1 or 2 copies when you go second. It's particularly bad against things like Twin Twisters, obviously, but it's also just a very slow, low impact card. It's also really bad against Thunder Dragon Colossus because you can't even attempt to search while that card is face up on the field. I also think one of the issues with Personal Spoofing that I sort of haven't mentioned in past videos is that you can sometimes open hands that are like Multi-Faker, Personal Spoofing, and Manifestation. Now, while all three of those cards are very good and have their own uses, in many ways, especially on the first turn, you're using those cards to summon a Multi-Faker. So when you open a hand going first where you have 5 cards and 3 of them summon Multi-Faker, it's kind of like you didn't draw 2 of those. And I know it's a little bit of an oversimplification, but in general, when you open Personal Spoofing going first, you're using it to search the Multi-Faker and summon it. But if you already have the Multi-Faker, it's basically a do-nothing card. It's just a trap card you flip up to summon the Faker. Now, obviously, in longer games, the more turns the game goes on, this card just gets better and better. But right now, because all the decks are so much faster than Altergeists, you really have to open up super high impact cards going first or second, and this card is simply too slow and too vulnerable to many forms of back row removal or even Ash Blossom to consistently play in your deck without fear of just getting blown out of the water. With this in mind, I want to show you my deck profile from the ARG and kind of talk about some of the things that I've learned along the way these past 3 weeks. I also want to mention I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this profile. I've changed a couple things from the past 2 weeks of events where I played in this exact same format, but I do want to shout out that in a few days, once I put it together, I'm going to do a video where I look at all 3 of the past 3 weeks of Altergeists profiles and sort of compare and contrast the different decks and see which cards I found to be staples and which cards I sort of played at one event and didn't play again, and which cards I moved around between the main and side deck. So anyway, let's jump right in. So first off, we have 3 copies of Altergeists Marionetta. I should probably zoom in, that's a good idea. We have professional, by the way. 3 copies of Altergeists Marionetta, 3 copies of Altergeists Multifaker, 3 copies of Altergeists Mylusic, 2 copies of Silk, and 1 copy of Concrete. Just your standard Altergeist cards there. I will not waste your time anymore talking about those guys, even though there's so much to say about them. We have 3 copies of Ash Blossom. I mean, that's pretty standard. 2 copies of Valor. You will notice that I cut the Thanos from the main deck. I'll probably talk about that more in that later analysis video, but basically I just felt that I really like Thanos, and it's really good when you go second, but when you go first, it's like really awkward. You'll open hands that are like Thanos Multifaker, and when you do that, you'll basically never summon the Thanos that game, so it's like really awkward to get rid of. Card is still very, very powerful going second, but when you go first, it's like a really unfortunate card to have. For the spell cards, we have 3 Pot of Extravagance. So this used to be like the reason to play this deck, like the reason to play Altergeist over other decks, that you got to play Pot of Greed and they didn't. The downside is that right now Sekka's Light can be played in Danger Thunder Dragons, which is a better deck than this one, and also they get sort of a better version of Pot of Greed. Sekka's Light in the decks that can play it is ridiculous. I mean, you get to draw 2 cards for no drawback, and also you get to sort of have that mulligan effect. Way better in a vacuum than Extravagance if you're comparing the decks that can play the 2 cards. Obviously this card is very good in this deck, and not every deck can play Sekka's Light. Things like Striker and Salamangreats can't, but it's just worth mentioning that one of the reasons that I used to say you should play Sekka is because we get to use Pot of Greed, but I guess other decks get to do that too, so I don't know, it's a weird spot for Altergeist, but we get Manhunt in a couple weeks. And then we have 3 copies of Secret Village. That's pretty standard, and 1 copy of 1 from 1. I took the Super Poly out of the main deck. It just wasn't consistent enough. I kept losing to Strikers after like not losing to like any. I think I had like an 80% win rate at YCSs against Strikers up until the last like 3 weeks, and it's just been really, really rough. So I've been trying to make that matchup better. For the Altergeist traps, we have 2 copies of Protocol, 1 copy of Station. Like I said, no copies of Spoofing, and like I said, I really didn't miss it. Even when you draw like the Silk, it's not that bad, and I didn't draw any hands that were like double Silk, which obviously would be terrible. But even those hands with like the Spoofing are still pretty bad, and also Spoofing's like pretty bad if you like draw multiples. We have 3 copies of Impermanence, obviously made a little bit more consistent by not having Thanos. When you go second, you side both of them though. You keep this in, you side the Thanos in just because you just want more things stop your opponent. You're not always going to draw Impermanence Thanos. It's not going to happen. Then we have 3 copies of Summon Limit. My mind's kind of like gone back and forth on this card. It is really good. It's really powerful against Thunder Dragons, and it's even pretty good against Striker, just because they go Ray and then Kagari, and then you like Protocol the Kagari, and then they try to use Ray's effect and you flip Summon Limit. That's pretty good. It's okay against Salamangreats. Honestly, against Salamangreats, this card basically is just like a D barrier. It just like stops them for 1, maybe 2 turns if you're lucky. And the reason being is that that deck has access to Foxy at like every single point of the duel, so they can always destroy this card, but it's sort of good for like helping you catch up, which I guess is like pretty useful. And then we have, oh man, the MVP. I needed to play 3 of this card. Lost Wind is so good. This is particularly useful against Salamangreats, because that's like a matchup where you need all the value you can get, and this gives you 2 negations out of 1 card. Pretty big deal, and also the attack modification is so good. I mean, so many times, like, your opponents will summon, like, every single time you play this deck, games 2 and 3, your opponent is going to have Prankatops in their deck. They just summon it, 2600 attack, and what they always try to do is attack over something to bait like a card that you have, and then they chain its effect. So they attack, and then damage step, you flip Lost Wind because it does attack and defense modification, and then you put it to 1300, their monster dies, and they don't get a chance to blow up any of your cards. Really strong situation there. Also protects Inspector Border. There were 3 times where I watched my opponent. It was so sad, but I would have Inspector Border and Lost Wind face down, and I would watch them take like 3 turns to make like a Heat Leo, invest all of their cards into it, use all of their resources, and then they would attack Inspector Border. I'd flip Lost Wind in the damage step, and then they would just scoop, and they were so sad. But this card was insane. I wish I played 3. We played 2 evenly match because I felt, I don't know, at YCS Chicago, I felt like I was going to be really unlucky, and I was, and as far as dice rolls go, and I played 2 of these, and they were really good, and then at Atlanta, I thought I was going to be pretty lucky, so I didn't play these, and I won a lot of die rolls. At this event, I thought I would once again be very unlucky, and it was true. I won 2 die rolls, like, the entire weekend, and this card was like, okay, it's not that bad against Altergeists. I know that, like, it always seems like they open roar, but honestly, if you have, like, 1 hand trap, they usually can't get to the roar. I mean, they would have to hard draw at that point, so it's whatever. It's pretty good. I mainly played this card because at Atlanta in the 3v3, there were so many times against Salamangreats where my opponent like literally said, if you have evenly match, I'm just going to lose right here, because they'd put like 5 monsters on board, but not quite enough to kill me, and like if I had this, I would have just blown them out. And then we had the obviously really good cards, the 2 strikes and 1 judgment, and then 1 I flip this and win the game card. This like screwed me a bunch at the YCS Atlanta, but this event was really good, so obviously you're going to play these cards. As far as strike goes, instead of like warning, yeah, it just comes down to like I don't think Denko is like that big of a deal against this deck. Like sometimes they draw it, a lot of times they don't though, and you can usually like out the Denko pretty easily. You just like bounce it with Silk, or you can just like flip all your cards preemptively. It's not that big a deal, but Strike's really good against hand traps. I keep saying the extra deck doesn't really matter, but I'll go through it really fast. We have 3 copies of Hexia, 2 copies of this card that you never make unless you banish all the Hexias, 2 copies of this card, which I actually made quite a bit. It's I don't know, it's like, it's a pretty good card. It's not like the best card, but it's kind of cool. Sometimes when you do the combo and like you banish like 2 Hexias with the Extravagance, it's really nice to make this, and you can like, it's cool because usually when you have like the 2 Hexias, you can like loop them in some way and you can get to like double negations, but this guy's kind of like a pseudo double negation, because it can summon multi-fake from the deck, which is kind of neat. We have 2 copies of Linkribo, 1 Clara and Rushka, 1 Nightmare Phoenix, and then the fusion cards. I still played the Super Poly, so 2 Violet Chimera, 1 Starving Venom Fusion Dragon, and 1 Predaplant Dragon Spelly or whatever. This card's really good, and the reason this card is good, by the way, is because it doesn't need like a fusion monster, so you can even do it against, like, I did this, and it would have won me the game if it wasn't time, but I Super Poly'd a Danger Bigfoot and a Phantom Skyblaster to make this, because it just takes two dark monsters as long as they're not tokens, and that's kind of cool. Like, with this card and this card, it takes a lot more setup, but this guy in particular just takes 2 darks. Everyone's playing darks right now, so against the Thunder Dragon boards, it's good against, in almost every single case, it can break their board in some way, and both of these guys' effects are both like super relevant. You got like a ton of attack power and stuff like that, and you also got like negating effects, which is cool. So that's the extra deck. Pretty standard stuff. I think that's like the same 14 cards for the past like month. For the side deck, we have 3 copies of Thanos. It was good. It was I wouldn't say this was like the best card ever, probably just because I wasn't maining it. It's so hard to evaluate this card because you don't see it like winning the game, right? All it does is like fix your hands and makes your deck a little bit more consistent. So it's really hard like analyzing like how good this card is, because it's not like a do nothing card, but it's a card that like it's really hard to like, because you just draw the cards and you put one back, and then you don't really think about like, okay, how much better did my hand just get, and then you're cycling so much. But overall, it's really good against Salamangreat and Thunder Dragons going second. I stopped siding this against Striker because I felt like evenly match was really important, and I'm really glad that I stopped doing that. It seems good against Striker, and in other decks it's good against Striker, but in Altergeists you like have to resolve evenly match to beat the deck going second. 2 copies of Border. I forgot my deck box with extra cards in it at home, and it had the 3rd Border. I absolutely should have played this card at 3. I totally underestimated how good this was against Salamangreats. Going first, going second, doesn't matter. It's super big, and it's just hard for them to deal with. Like, yeah, there's like in theory cards that they can use to out this. I mentioned like the Heat Leo thing, but like a lot of times by the time that they do that, you have like an entire board set up. Really, really solid. This card is probably the best card in my side deck. Then we have 2 of the Dino Wrestler, really good card going to second. 2 Lancia, I mean, it's like fine. I don't know, 3 is like a little bit cloggy. I need to make space for like other stuff. That was like the main like deciding factor for playing evenly main, is that like I needed more space in the side deck, and it's kind of why I'm not playing like a ton of 3-ofs. One Super Poly, really good card. The new edition, or the new old edition, the card that I used to play, that everyone used to play, and then like everyone stopped playing, but I think is now really good. Rivalry of Warlords. Once again, I felt like my Striker matchup, like, despite the fact that the deck still has Secret Village, despite the fact that the deck still has like good cards against Striker, and Striker really can't beat the double Hexia setup, I felt like I just was missing something. I was missing evenly match, I was missing rivalry, and I put him back in, and the Striker matchup got a lot easier. This card's really good, and also it's really good against Thunder Dragon Dangers, because they have like 1,000 different types. And then the 3rd Strike and the 3rd evenly match, I don't know. This was like, I was debating whether or not to play like 3 strikes in the main with 1 evenly match, or like 2 strikes in the main and 2 evenly match, or maybe not even play like these copies. These could have been like something else, but overall, really good. I felt like Strike was really powerful going second. I know it sounds silly, but it's good against Striker, because when they summon like Shizuku for the turn, or like Hayate or whatever their turn sites, to just strike it and they can't Ray. It's good against Salamangreats, because they do the same thing with like Reincarnation Link summons. But overall, that's my Altergeist profile. I'm going to go more in depth with like the changes that I made throughout the past 3 weeks in a video later on this week or next week. I had a lot of fun. I mean, it's rough out there for Altergeist, but it's getting better. Like, I felt like a lot of my losses were avoidable. Some of the times I got a little bit flustered. Like the game that I got like cheated by accident was in game 2, and then because I was so flustered in game 3, I made a pretty big misplay, which was really disappointing. The game shouldn't have even gone to game 3, so I was just a little bit salty and a little bit like uncontrollable. I was just like, I was so focused on like what happened in the past, I wasn't focusing on like how to actually play to still win the match. And then as far as like losing in time, I'm pretty good at like avoiding time. With this deck, I just feel like if you go into time, it's just a death sentence. You lose every single time, no pun intended, and that is pretty much exactly true, unless you have like the perfect hand. Sometimes I guess you can poke with like my Lucic, but a lot of times if you go in time with this deck, you'll probably just lose almost every single time. But anyway, hopefully you guys enjoyed this profile and this discussion on personal spoofing. Hopefully that card is like good again someday if people stop like playing Ash and stop playing Twin Twisters in like every single deck. It used to be that like every deck would play like Ash, and some decks would like side Twin Twisters, but it seems like everyone's like maining Ash and Twin Twisters and so many other cards. It's also really bad against the Dino Wrestler too. But no, someday personal spoofing will be good again. Probably not too long from now, but right now it's kind of in an awkward spot. But anyway, I'll see you guys later. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Goodbye.